Hi, everyone, and welcome to my show called We Were Lied to About 9/11. I am your host, John Gold, and this show is part of the Soapbox People's Network. This week's show will focus on the importance of obtaining documents from the government regarding 9/11. It will focus on the classification of documents and the redactions within many of the documents that have been released. It will focus on how sometimes within these documents we see contradictions between what is within the document and what is written within the 9/11 report. This aspect of research was very important to the late, great John Judge, an early mentor of mine who unfortunately passed away earlier this year. This show is dedicated to him.
Okay, this is John, and I'm here with Erik Larson, and I'm going to quickly read his bio for us. Erik Larson is a 9/11 researcher and activist. In his view, the 9/11 Commission's failure to credibly account for how and why 9/11 happened and the general acceptance or apathy of the media and the public toward the official story represent national security and constitutional crisis and corruption in American society itself. Concerned for the U.S. Republic and the well-being of present and future generations around the world, Erik, among other things, has made well over 8,000 9/11 Commission and other 9/11 related documents publicly available through two file sharing websites on the web. It's primarily this work that we have Erik on to talk about today. And before we talk to Erik, I have a few personal things to say. Erik is the one who came to Washington, D.C. to film my act of civil disobedience where I chained myself to the White House fence. And I was very grateful to him for that. He also got me out of jail. Another thing is that Erik and I have approached 9/11 in a very similar fashion. So hopefully that will make for an interesting conversation today. So hi, Erik. How are you doing?
Doing well, John, and yeah, thanks for remembering that incident with the arrest and all that. Yeah, good times.
Yeah, no, good times. I also remember you came to. I'm sorry. You came to the March 2010 march against the war, and we had lunch with Cindy.
Right.
Do you remember that?
I remember that too. Yeah. Yeah, you've got some photos of me from that day, I think. And yeah, you're right. We have a similar approach in our thinking to what is important about the information about 9/11 and what the citizenry can do as a strategy to get truth and justice. Yeah, that's why I agreed to the interview.
Now, I am dedicating this show to the late, great John Judge, and I know that he was a friend of yours or an inspiration, perhaps. Would you like to say a little something about John?
John Judge, unfortunately, passed away this year, and he was behind a lot of efforts for truth and justice in society, not just 9/11, but he was there from the beginning when all the information that was coming out was fucked up, strange and incomplete, and there were a lot of serious questions that needed to be asked. And he worked with Cynthia McKinney while she was in office, the House of Representatives, to work on investigations and use the power of Congress to get things done. He worked on 9/11 Citizens Watch, which worked with the families, especially the Family Steering Committee and the Jersey Girls, to watchdog the Commission's work and to even help it do its work, to understand what kind of questions it should be asking, that it admitted at the beginning, derelict, saying the Families Commission should be a roadmap, but they didn't do it, And in addition to that work, his work investigating numerous other deep state events and the actors behind them, so many. I mean, especially JFK and RFK and MLK, those political assassinations, were some of his primary work that he's best known for. And, I don't think he published a book, but he did a lot of writing and research, and his work was used by other researchers and authors, and very well known in communities researching alternative events like 9/11 and JFK assassination. And also, in addition to that work, he was a longtime activist in D.C., working with the school system, compelling them to make sure that the kids there had options and information in addition to the ROTC programs in military, trying to get into the schools and recruit, like with a backdoor draft, these poor young black kids to get into the military. He was letting them know about nonviolent options that they could use to better themselves in society and make a living. And probably forgetting a lot of things, but he was well loved by a lot of different people. I remember David Swanson commented on his passing, and someone else whose name escaped me. But anyway, yeah, John Judge. Glad you're dedicating this show to him, and I'm honored to be on a show that is dedicated to him.
Yeah, John, very early on, was an inspiration to me. The way he presented things, the arguments that he would make, it was so compelling. And, I have a little quick story about John. The first time I met him was during the 9/11 People's Commission, which was hosted by Pacifica Radio. It took place on 9/11/2004 in Washington, D.C. And, I had just recently heard of 9/11 Citizens Watch a few months prior, and so I wanted to help in any way I could. So the way that he asked me to help him was to put change in his car, and I did. I kept running in and out to put change in the meter for his car.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was a major influence on me, and he is greatly missed. So let's go ahead and get ahead with the interview. What was the day of 9/11 like for you?
You know what? I guess it was probably like it was for a lot of Americans. At the time, I kind of assumed that Democrats and Republicans might both be beholden to corporate interests, but we had a free press because anybody could say anything, and then I kind of figured if anything was, suspicious or whatever, the media would be doing its job if Congress wouldn't. And, I kind of couldn't believe that anybody would not do everything in their utmost to make sure something like that didn't happen. So I was in shock, watching these towers burning, wondering what's going on for the people in New York and their families. And I go to work, after waking up and seeing it on the news in California, and just kind of in shock. Even after Oklahoma and the first World Trade Center bombing and the Millennium threat, I kind of just I never took terrorism seriously as a threat. I just figured it doesn't happen here. I hear about it happening in the Middle East now and then, but I'm kind of concerned with what's happening in the United States and my own life and all that. And then, so I'm wondering, so what's going to happen now? Because this is a major event. There has to be some kind of response. Who are these people that attack us? You've never heard of Al-Qaeda. That's kind of what it was like.
So
kind of feeling patriotic and outraged and hurt, feeling bad for the people that lost their lives and pissed off. Who would do something like this? If you've got a grievance, work within the political process. I figure I kind of still feel okay. It's screwed up, but it works. Nonviolence is a better strategy than violence. And terrorism, became real. It was, in America, the worst attack since Pearl Harbor, as they say.
As they say. Okay, when did you first begin to question what we were told about that day?
I guess even from the beginning, I was kind of skeptical, but I did not entirely disbelieve what we were told. I was not sure what to believe. And there were certain things that came out in the news over the years. I remember hearing about the collapse of a third building and thinking it was strange, and then hearing about that NORAD had drills involving hijacked airliners being used as weapons prior to 9/11, and was thinking that was going to be an issue, but didn't hear much more about it. And the appointment of, or attempted appointment of Kissinger to the commission, and kind of just the whole thing, it's just Democrats and Republicans on there. Didn't have high hopes for it, but I figured there was going to be an investigation, and that it wouldn't be possible to cover anything up, and that people would be held accountable, and then nobody was. So it was, and I noticed how well it all worked out for the Bush administration and their cronies in the military-industrial complex, and how they already had an agenda to go into Iraq, which was mentioned even on the campaign trail by Bush. And then, but I didn't really question it until I saw some DVDs in 2005, which I would not recommend anyone. A lot of BS information in them, but it got me to go looking for information. And when I went looking, I discovered that there was a whole community, even a movement of researchers and activists on this issue who were actively working to highlight certain information which really cast into doubt what we were being told about 9/11 if we're not critically fatal to certain parts of the narrative, and raise serious questions about really who was responsible, even if bin Laden and these 19 accused were involved and actually did the physical work of flying planes into buildings. Anyway, so it was about 2005 that I started to seriously question things and became an activist and, doing my own research, trying to figure out what could be known and what wasn't known.
It's interesting because I did my own work, starting from mid 2002, early 2003, and I never stumbled across the 9/11 truth movement, surprisingly. I did everything on my own. I was contacting my local reps. I was contacting my local media and saying, why aren't you covering this? So, as I mentioned, you've uploaded over 8,000 documents to the online file sharing website, scribd.com / 9/11 document archive. What are these records and where did they come from?
These are primarily 9/11 Commission records, but they're also records obtained from other sources through Freedom of Information Act and Mandatory Declassification Review, also known as FOIA and MDR, respectively. And the 9/11 Commission may have some of the records that I got through other channels in their records, and they just hadn't been released yet, or they may not have them, don't know. And the ones are there represent a fraction of what the 9/11 Commission had. But the 2009, January 2009, they were mandated by law, agreement by the 9/11 Commission, or actually I guess it was a mandate by law, but the instruction from the 9/11 Commission to the National Archives that they've been released in 5 years. And this was worked out with Philip Zelikow and Thomas Kane and Hamilton, who are the executive director and the commission co-chairs. And by law, certain government records must be preserved. Certain records can be destroyed if they're, not necessary or whatever reason, but certain records must be preserved, and the 9/11 Commission's records were to be reserved, which means they're going to wind up in the National Archives. And at some point, they become public unless there's a reason to keep them from being made public, which may be national security or personal privacy or any number of other things. So they were down there, and January 2009 they were scheduled to be released, and they did put out a sizable number. According to Thomas Kane, the Commission had access to over 2 million records. And according to archivists at NARA, the National Archives is also known as NARA, Chris Wilhelm, the 9/11, or according to Chris Wilhelm, the NARA archivist, NARA has 1.4 million pages. So if the 9/11 Commission had access to that other over 600,000 pages, they didn't actually get physical custody, and it didn't wind up in the National Archives. And that's just pages. They also had a lot of gigs of video and audio and other records, terabytes even. I think, it escapes my mind. It was definitely, I think, over 2 terabytes that Chris said they had just in the digital stuff. And a lot of paper records. And so...
what prompted you to go down there and do it?
As a public service, I was aware that they were going to be released, and a couple of colleagues at the History Commons, Matt and Kevin Fenton, were interested in these records, and as well as, I guess it was mainly them. So I was in discussion with them. Unless Paul Thompson was around then too. I can't remember. But anyway, yeah. So I was in discussion with them about getting these records, and at that time I had just moved over here by coincidence and was unemployed, couldn't find a job for about a year, so I spent every day down there, 50, 60 hours a week sometimes, just scanning these records, scanning everything that had been released, which is actually, even though it's a lot of pages, it's a fraction of what is in there. And let me just finish up on that line real quick. So out of the 1.4 million pages that they had, NARA had processed about 35%, which is what they made available. However, a lot of that 35% was in the form of withdrawal notices saying hundreds or thousands of pages of what would have been in the files is not there because it's withheld for whatever reason. A lot of times it's classified. So even though it's been processed and the public can know in general terms what they might be able to get access to, if they can get it declassified, it's not there. And what was released is also, when there's actually physical paper in there, a lot of it's redacted. And a lot of what has been released is not agency records per se, although some agency records did get released in this batch. But a lot of it is just the 9/11 Commission's own records. It's interview records, memos, records of meetings with staff, press briefings, and so on. All the records that it created as part of its investigation. It created a lot of stuff. They had 8 different teams, each investigating really complex issues, interviewing hundreds of people. And in addition to the ones that I scanned, the National Archives also on its own website released a significant portion, but not all, of the memoranda for the records, which were created from staff notes from interviews. It's basically like a summary of what was said in the interview.
Right, and we're going to get it. I'm sorry, we're going to get into the MFRs a little bit later.
Okay.
But okay, so you've essentially you've collected and put online 8,000 documents. There is a great many documents that have yet to be released for whatever reason. A lot of times, they cite national security. And why is it important for researchers to look at this information? And John Judge, I could probably answer that. John Judge used to say a lot that when you go through the actual records of the investigation, a lot of times you'll find contradictory information than what's in the actual report itself. So that is one of the reasons why getting these documents is important, making them available to the public is important, and so on. Now, I'm going to read a little bit. It's part of a question.
Could I just comment on the point you just made?
Sure, go ahead.
Sure. So the 9/11 commissioners themselves, all of them had conflicts of interest. Some of them, like personal, professional, financial, political. All of them had at least one. Some of them had many, and especially the two chairs and co-chairs. Leah Hamilton, very interesting history involved in what was essentially a cover-up with the October surprise and the Iran-Contra. And Kane, a lot of or several financial conflicts of interest. In addition to their political, again, how come they're all Democrats and Republicans? We're going to have an independent investigation. They can't find any credible, experienced non-Democrats and Republicans to head up this very important investigation. In addition to the commissioners themselves, half of the staff had the same kind of conflicts of interest, at least the professional ones. They got people from the same agencies that they were investigating to assist with these investigations. Not necessarily they were actively working for them, but had previously spent their entire careers in these agencies. So who do you think they're going to be sympathetic to when it comes to telling the story? But even so, and I guess you consider the other half of the staff that, as Americans, were concerned and wanted to get to the bottom of things and make sure something like 9/11 never happened again. A lot of stuff came out in staff reports, memos, things that were sent to Zelikow and things that were sent to the commissioners trying to get around Zelikows tight rein over the staff's work that not only contradict what was generally the gist of the report, its official conclusions and all that, and its official narrative, but were complaining about how the investigation was being conducted. So, yes, very, very useful for researchers who are interested in finding out what really happened, whether it's history or whether it's current events that are being used to shape, our policies, our government's policies, foreign and domestic. It's useful for researchers to dig through the actual government's own records because sometimes there's stuff in there that it's just critical to what the public is being told. Anyway, go on.
Well, you're right, and I completely agree with you. There's many problems, obviously, with the 9/11 Commission, and that we can devote a multitude of hours to that topic alone. Yes, there were many staffers who did not trust Zelikow, and so forth. Now, on September 25th, 2006, former 9/11 Commissioner Richard Benveniste makes public knowledge a deal within the 9/11 Commission to keep Bush, Cheney, and Clinton's testimony classified until 2009. And then on September 8th, 2011, it was reported that, quote, 10 years after al-Qaeda's attack on the United States, the vast majority of the 9/11 Commission's investigative records remain sealed at the National Archives in Washington, D.C., even though the Commission had directed the archives to make most of the material public in 2009. You've already gone over a lot of that.
Right. An additional point on that, other records, like what has been released is mostly junk. I mean, there's files and files of newspaper clippings that were related to events and the Commission's work, and other records that, as far as someone who's looking for truth and justice, are just not going to be useful. The Commission just got all kinds of crap dumped on them that really didn't make a difference to their investigation, but impeded their work. And in addition to that, as I mentioned, the people running the investigation had all these conflicts of interest. They had a story to tell. They didn't want to get to the bottom of things necessarily. There's an agenda there. So again, the records that they're creating are not necessarily useful, and these are the ones that are harmless to the official narrative. Of course, that's what's going to be put out first. But even so, certain important things have come to light. But I think I got off track. You were saying?
No, I was just I was just making, restating what you said, is that there was a deal made by the 9/11 Commission to get these documents released, and only 35% of them have been released, and many of the documents that have been released are greatly redacted, as you mentioned.
Yeah, there's stuff in them that might be important. Yeah, but go on.
Now, in many of the memorandums for the records, or what some people call MFRs, which are essentially staff statements describing discussions with witnesses, there are many redactions. For instance, 9/11 Whistleblowers, Sibel Edmonds' MFR is almost completely blank.
Right.
I also noticed that Prince Bandar's MFR is still classified. Are they planning on releasing these documents in their entirety? Ever? Do you know?
Edmonds, let me comment on both of those situations. Sibel Edmonds, as you know, FBI whistleblower, who has been, by the people who she has named as being implicated, they've called her a nut, conspiracy theorist, crazy, all kinds of disparaging terms. However, if what she has to say is just a bunch of garbage, how come it is blacked out for classified reasons? So that's really questionable that there's not something very important in there. And Sibel Edmonds, in her own work and as head of the National Security Whistleblowers Coalition, and even before that, released a letter signed by her and 24 other people who had knowledge from the intelligence community, the FBI, who had knowledge prior to 9/11 of what had gone down and had observed the Commission's work and read its report and realized that it had seriously failed in its duty to account for how and why 9/11 happened. And most of these people are still, they're being gagged from testifying publicly or under oath about what they knew, and no one is calling them to do it that has the authority to do so. Remarkably, a lot of Sibel Edmonds' testimony has come out under oath in 2008. But, the 9/11 Commission did interview her for like 3.5 hours, I think, and came up with a 6.5 page summary of the interview, which is almost entirely redacted.
Well, one of the things about Sibel Edmonds is the fact that she was trying to get to testify before the 9/11 Commission, and they were not, responding to her. So the families actually snuck her in on one of the family 9/11 Commission meetings and forced them to talk to her. And her story received a footnote in the back of the book. Of the back of the 9/11 report.
Quality control.
I'm sorry?
And the footnote basically says the FBI needs to improve quality control on its translation unit.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't get into depth at all as to what we've learned from Sibel.
Right.
But again,
in that Inspector General's report, a lot of her allegations. But yes, her MFR, very significant document, and that needs to be released. Whether it will be ever made public while we have Democrat or Republican administrations, really questionable. And as far as Bandar and certain other Saudis who have a lot to answer for regarding what happened, Al-Bayoumi and Dumeri and Abdul Sattar Sheikh and some others, we can get into those. But the Bandar specifically, is this guy's interview record ever going to be released? The State Department would have to be involved, and because it involves sensitive diplomatic foreign relations, it's highly unlikely that one would ever be released as long as we have Democrat or Republican administrations as well.
Well, is there anybody fighting for the release?
Well, as far as I know, the 9/11 families, Jersey girls, some of them, Bill Doyle, are still advocating for their release. There's only so much they can do. The Jersey girls, I think, have already called for a new investigation 2 or 3 times since the 9/11 Commission's whitewash came out. There was, as we mentioned previously, a 9/11 truth movement, which has some people going down avenues that I find strange and useless. But there are other people that are working on getting records released. I myself, I'm currently, I'm not actively working on filing new requests for information. This sorely needs to be done. I'm not sure if Kevin Fenton is either at this point. I'm following up on requests that have already been filed, but I have a list with several hundred additional things that should be submitted for declassification review. Just from what we know about the records that have already been processed. One of the problems is that we do not even know what the commission got, especially amateur researchers like myself. I don't know what records to ask for, what records would and should have been created that should be in the commission's files. If anyone does know, then that is willing to give advice, that would be a big help that might be listening to this about specifically the types, names of types of records that would be in there. And then they can go looking for them. We can ask for, if you know what the record is, you can ask for declassification review of it, which is a avenue similar to Freedom of Information, the FOIA Act, but it's a different process and is sometimes more successful. So other than these people, not sure. I think there's a general interest in the public that more stuff be released, and there are a variety of research communities that I think have an interest in 9/11, but I'm not sure who is actively working on getting stuff out.
It seems as if they'll keep them. It seems as if they'll keep them classified and not for public consumption for as long as they can. If nobody's fighting for it.
Even Obama, who promised to be the transparency president, in his executive order has made provision for stuff to be held secret for over 75 years. As long as the, certain people, like people at certain levels, sign off on it, they can keep stuff secret forever, indefinitely.
Absolutely. So what is exactly a FOIA request, and do you have any advice for people wanting to make them? Also, what are MDRs?
Sure. Good question. So a Freedom of Information Act request, or FOIA, is a request that the government produce records, and a FOIA act can be phrased in general terms. You can ask for any records that the government has on a specific person or a specific topic, and it's sometimes a good idea to narrow the request to reduce the amount of research time and to not get a bunch of junk in response, which could wind up costing a lot in processing time and copying fees. But 1974, I'm not even sure. I think it was the 70s. The Freedom of Information Act was passed. Or was it under Clinton? You know what? I don't know. But it's on Wikipedia. It's not even a big deal. But it basically says that the government has to produce any records that it has unless there is a compelling interest in keeping them withheld, such as a person's privacy interest, a law enforcement interest, national security interest, a variety of things. There's exceptions, and the law has even been interpreted to mean that the government does not have to acknowledge having certain records if these records fall within certain generally national security-related circumstances. You can ask them, I want a copy of this record, and it will deny having it because it's exempt. But anyway, so that's one avenue that the public can find out what's going on in its government is by requesting records. As you noted earlier, sometimes there's information in the government's own records that contradicts what the people running the government are telling the public. And a MDR, which stands for Mandatory Declassification Review request, is a demand that certain information be reviewed for declassification. And this, the government has to do this if requested every 5 years, like once every 5 years. If it gets a second request within 5 years, it doesn't have to do it, but it has to do it at least once, which means that somebody somewhere in the government is going to take a look and see if the information that you want can be released. And with MDR, you have to request a specific document. You have to give detailed information about what you're asking for. You can't ask for information under a subject to be declassified. And there's also an appeal process which goes all the way to the Information and Security Oversight Office, which is part of the National Archives. It's the highest classification authority below the United States President. So if someone in a government agency is trying to keep some information covered up, either to protect themselves or some cronies or some political agenda that they have or whatever, or some crime that they're involved in, if they want to keep it covered up and they can't find a way to get that record destroyed without someone finding out and them getting prosecuted for it being destroyed, which isn't necessarily going to happen with the Democrats and Republicans in charge. But if it gets to the interagency Interagency Security Classification Appeals Panel, or ISCAP, if it gets to ISCAP, which is part of ISOO, then they're going to review it. And ISCAP's board is composed of someone from each agency, so they're going to discuss among themselves this information, more eyeballs on it, more brains thinking about, can we release this? And surprisingly, ISCAP has a better track record when it comes to getting classified information released than under FOIA. Under FOIA, you can sue for it to be released, but that means you're going to be in a federal court, and generally federal judges are deferential to the executive branch's claims of privilege and secrecy and national security and all that. So suing in FOIA for classified information, more likely to be a dead end than just appealing to ISCAP, which could take many, many years, but may not. And according to the National Security Archive, which is based at George Washington University in D.C., which has done great work for decades on getting classified information out about all kinds of important subjects, has put out a requester's guide on Freedom of Information Act and FOIA and MDR, the Mandatory Declassification. So I recommend that everyone go to nsarchive.org if you're interested in learning about how to get records from the government. That's the single best source of information, and there are other sources of information out there like Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, but I found the NS Archive guide a lot more useful. Anyway.
Where can people go to find what you have already made available online from the 9/11 Commission?
So as mentioned before, it's scribd.com/911 document archive, and scribd is spelled SCRIBD.com/911 document archive. That's where I've uploaded everything that I've gotten from NARA and from FOIA and MDR, and I've also uploaded records that other researchers have obtained. And it's all 9/11 related stuff. And in addition to that, everything that I've gotten, I've sent to 911datasets.org, which is a torrent site. You can't link to individual files in a way that they'll be displayed the way you can at Scribd, but Scribd charges money, and if you want to download all the records and know how to use torrent, you can get that from 911 datasets, plus a voluminous amount of other information that has come out from other channels, a lot of it related to the World Trade Center destruction investigations. But there are a lot of other 9/11 related subjects as well. So definitely recommend checking out those sites if you're interested in doing research. Okay,
well, from the Joint Congressional Inquiry into 9/11, there are 28 redacted pages supposedly having to do with Saudi support for the hijackers, and there are other countries supposedly listed as well. Obama promised 9/11 family members Kristen Brotweiser and Bill Doyle that he would release these pages and never has. The Obama administration has also made it difficult for the 9/11 families to sue certain Saudis. And right now, there is a big push by certain family members and members of Congress to get these documents released. What is your opinion on all that?
Well, I think those papers should definitely be released. Senator Bob Graham knows what's in them. He was co-chair of the JICI, the Joint Intelligence Committee inquiry, the congressional inquiry. And he said publicly many times that it's not a national security threat, and the fact that it is being suppressed it should be of concern to Americans who are concerned about national security, because there's information in there, and he's gone even so far to say it's the Saudi government, but there's other foreign governments in there apparently, who provided logistical and financial support to the hijackers, and we already actually through other channels know a lot about this information as well. It's been documented, and the question is, why is the government? Go ahead.
As I mentioned, Prince Bandar's memorandum for the record is classified, and one of the things that has trickled out over the years, especially from Bob Graham, is the fact that the Bandar family was financially connected to two of the hijackers, and many think that because Prince Bandar was such good friends with Bush, that's why Bush essentially kept these pages redacted. Now, to me, if that's the case, and, you know, I'm not sure that it is, but if that's the case, the president essentially helped to cover up, you know, possible participants in the murder of 2,976 people. That, to me, is an act of treason, you know, when it all comes down to it. And that's just one thing regarding the 9/11 attacks.
Covering up for anyone that was involved in 9/11 is tantamount to treason. I absolutely agree. It's
accessory after the fact. I mean, if you want to talk about real crimes.
It's only that. And there's a lot of other questions about what Bush did and didn't do before 9/11 and on 9/11 and afterwards. But just for that, that's essentially an act of treason. If you know some foreign country was involved in attacking the United States, and then you're protecting them for whatever reason, and we can assume it's the oil that the U.S. gets from Saudi Arabia, the business relations that the Bush family has with the Saudi royal family, and the fact that they had billions in U.S. treasuries and all these other investments in the United States. But it's treason. He takes an oath to defend the Constitution, not even to physically protect Americans or the country. And here he is selling out an investigation of the worst attack on the U.S. since Pearl Harbor to protect whatever is being protected there, and Obama as well, and accessory act to the fact, preventing this information from being released. And just to finish the thought from earlier, if the guy who knows what's in the report, who's responsible for that investigation and report being together, says there's no reason to keep that information classified, I, as an American, of course, I think that information should be released. And it's not just Bob Graham saying so. Other people that know what's in there have been saying it should be released.
Well, the Jersey Girls have for years attempted to get these documents released, and now there's an effort by Representatives Walter Jones and Stephen Lynch and Representative Massey and a few others who are attempting to get these documents released, so hopefully they will. Okay, I think we answered the questions regarding the Joint Congressional Inquiry. Just so everyone knows, we're having some technical difficulties, so we're trying our best to get this interview done. During the 9/11 Commission, instead of using subpoena power to obtain documents, they instead used what were called document requests, which could be and were in many cases ignored. I think they used subpoena power 2 times, once with NORAD and once with the FAA, but that was it. Do you know which documents weren't supplied to the 9/11 Commission? I mean, we talked about that earlier. We really don't, do we?
Yeah, we do not have a full accounting for sure. There are some interesting questions about that, though. First, on the subpoena power, the Commission could have used that. It had the authority to do so from the law that Congress passed. And the excuse that they gave was that if we subpoena documents, then they're going to fight us in court, and that's going to tie everything up past the deadline to do the commission's work, which sounds like an incredibly bogus excuse, but that's essentially the excuse that was given. But if the Bush administration wants to get to the bottom of this, why are they going to be fighting subpoenas anyway? And another question, since they did use document requests, why were they not complying with these document requests? Certain things, like one question that comes to mind, NORAD was asked for any after-action reports. In addition to a lot of other things, they're asked for any after-action reports that were prepared in response to the events of 9/11. And this is a common thing that's done in the military. Whenever there's an exercise or some major event that they're involved in, an after-action report is submitted. Same thing like with a cop. Any incident that a cop is involved with, in a civilian, doesn't even have to be a shooting or whatever, you're just writing a ticket for some offense, there is a report being made. And these reports are used to understand what happened and how to improve performance in the future and create accountability. There was no after-action report prepared by NORAD, apparently, in response to the events of 9/11, even though there's these gross violations of air sovereignty 4 times on the day, with these planes flying around unauthorized in the U.S., hijackers crashing them into the buildings or attempting to do so. It's just incredible. And in addition to that, I remember, go ahead.
With regards to NORAD, I mean, just to give people an idea, there were people on the staff who wanted to refer NORAD to the Justice Department for a criminal investigation because of the lies that they were telling the 9/11 Commission. And, it actually, I read that it was Zelikow who sat on that request for a long time and ultimately decided to send it to the Inspector General instead, someone who cannot hold anyone accountable for any of their lies. All they can do is recommend that people are held accountable.
Clearly Zelikow was not one of the people who wanted to get to the bottom of anything. He was protecting the responsible agencies.
Exactly. Now, and I'm going to read a little bit for this question to give it some context. In June 2009, one of the documents that you found at the National Archives was written about in an article at hcgroups.wordpress.com entitled 2 days before 9/11, military exercise simulated suicide hijack targeting New York. From that report, it says, quote, the U.S. military conducted a training exercise in the 5 days before the 9/11 attacks that included simulated aircraft hijackings by terrorists. In one of the scenarios implemented on September 9th, terrorists hijacked a London to New York flight, planning to blow it up with explosives over New York, end quote. Also from that article, it says, quote, although it is not listed in the document, there was also a simulated plane hijacking scheduled to take place in the Northeast United States on the day of 9/11, and its timing overlapped with the real-world events. According to Vanity Fair, quote, the day's exercise was designed to run a range of scenarios, including a traditional simulated hijack in which politically motivated perpetrators commandeer an aircraft, land on a Cuba-like island, and seek asylum, end quote. When Meads was informed of the first real war of hijacking, members of its staff initially assumed this was part of the exercise. For example, Master Sergeant Maureen Dooley, the leader of the ID section, told the other members of her team, quote, we have a hijack going on, get your checklists, the exercise is on, end quote. Major Kevin Nasapani, the mission crew commander, actually said out loud, quote, the hijack's not supposed to be for another hour, end quote. Like numerous hijacking scenarios described in the NORAD exercises document, There was no mention of this simulated hijacking scheduled for the morning of September 11th in the 9/11 Commission report. Now, I think only one war game was mentioned in the 9/11 report, and it was in a footnote in the back of the book. I remember during the time of the 9/11 Commission, 9/11 researcher Nick Levis was actually screaming at them, talk about the war games, when NORAD was in front of them. Do you think we'll ever know the full truth about the military exercises that were taking place that day or in the days before?
If we elect people who are committed to serving the public interest, we can get the truth about 9/11 and justice. And yeah. So, but as far as that record and the questions about the war games, where do I start? So Vanity Fair, Vigilant Guardian, the hijacking to Cuba exercise. Very interesting that this was not mentioned in the 9/11 Commission report, and the only attention that the Commission gave to this, other than like the quotes, which it didn't mention, was part of that kind of an exercise. It did say it was like a hijacking, but then it also mentioned in the footnote about Vigilant Guardian being involving a Soviet bomber exercise. So yeah, very curious. We do not have complete information. The document that you mentioned that was posted at Scribed, which is titled NORAD 9/11 Hijack Summary, I believe. Kevin Fenton wrote the article at hcgroups.wordpress.com that you mentioned, analyzing that, and that document does not go up to the day of 9/11. It goes up to September 10th, and the week before 9/11, there were quite a number of exercises being conducted. Some of them involved other hijackings, not just this one that was mentioned. Or actually, I'm not clear now. That document goes back to a few years before 9/11, but there were a number of exercises being conducted in that week before 9/11. And that document was prepared by 9/11 Commission staffer Miles Kara, who was the senior staff member of Team 8, which was looking at the military response on the day of 9/11. And it's basically a table where he plots out elements of all these different exercises that NORAD had been involved in going back to 1999 or 98, about 3 years before 9/11, that involved elements of the 9/11 plot. And when you look at it, it's like, wow, they drilled every single element of the 9/11 plot. Planes being hijacked, uses missiles, domestic hijackings, and so on. Planes being blown up. That when you mentioned that happened 2 days before 9/11, eerily similar to 9/11. And again, we still don't know what all the scenarios might have been that were being run on 9/11. But the exercises may or may not have interfered with the response. Maybe they were intended to. There's serious questions about why they weren't canceled. The person responsible, Colonel Robert Marr, was requested by Kevin Nacipany, the guy quoted in Vanity Fair, about canceling the exercise. He never gave the order to do so until it was all over. And again, his MFR is like barely scratching the surface. And there was another MFR where the commission mentioned that certain records that they had gotten about discrepancies in the records, and Marr agreed that the commission standards for quality control or something like that had not been met. But I'm getting off track here. Back to the document that was posted. So in the commission report, it says that prior to 9/11, there was no exercise that had postulated a hijacked airliner being hijacked from within the United States and used as a weapon. That NORAD had not done an exercise like that. And that statement is literally correct. However, NORAD had done exercises that involved all those elements repeatedly. It had been drilling responses to hijacking since the 70s. And if anything, even if they're not going to shoot down a commercial airliner, the response is still they are going to scramble and monitor and intercept, and it happened routinely prior to 9/11. There is a lot of different records, government records, as well as reports in the media about how routine this was prior to 9/11, because the United States has a problem with people flying drugs over the border. One of the things that the NORAD gets involved in is if there's unauthorized flights coming from certain places, they scramble jets to check out what's going on, and they'll force these people down. And in addition to that, they started this whole thing because of a fear about the Soviet Union invading the U.S. with bombers. And granted, that's not as much of a threat anymore, but the fear of or the threat of terrorism has only increased. And they have known since the Japan attacked Pearl Harbor with kamikaze pilots back in World War II, 1940s, that people have the potential to fly planes into property and cause massive damage and loss of life. They've known this is a threat. And in addition to that, and this is another footnote in the 9/11 Commission report, Samuel Bick, 1974, tried to hijack a commercial airliner from Baltimore.
Exactly. I was just about to...
Yeah, in order to fly into the White House and assassinate Nixon. So it's like they don't know that's a threat, and they're not taking steps to mitigate this. And all the other incidents where planes have been used as weapons. Of course, NORAD is going to be drilling this. And in addition to all these other incidents, they knew that Al-Qaeda possibly had plans to use planes as weapons in 1998. This was brought up by Ben Veniste in a commission hearing.
Well, they were also aware of Project Bojinka.
Yeah, and then Bojinka. And then the summer of threat, there was information out there about planes being used as missiles by Al-Qaeda and possibly the U.S. being a target. Everything was there. Just from what has come out, we know that they had enough information to at least harden defenses in the U.S. If the GA summit in Italy, if they're putting Bush on an aircraft carrier offshore to sleep at night, and they've got aircraft guns set up around the perimeter, just on the possibility that Al-Qaeda attack the GA summit with planes, and they know that the U.S. is a risk. They know these people are in the United States, and they're doing nothing to harden airport security or anything. And Sibel Edmonds,
one of the things I'm sorry.
Yeah, let me just finish real quick on that point. Sibel Edmonds said that she saw documents proving that the FBI had information indicating that bin Laden had plans, operatives in the country that were going to attack U.S. cities, 4 to 5 U.S. cities with planes. But go on.
One of the things that Sibel talks about is that in April 2001, Baruch Shachar, he found that yes, there were warnings that showed Al-Qaeda was planning on crashing planes into buildings. From what I remember, I mean, I'd have to go back and look. Okay. So, NORAD lied, and, the idea that they never, prepared for such things, or they...
Real quick. Just a quick note on Baruch Shachar. Sibel Edmonds got the commission to interview him. They interviewed him for 2.5 hours. His MFR, several pages, is also heavily redacted. But
right. Exactly. Another MFR or memorandum for the record that is greatly redacted. Now, with regards to the idea that they never envisioned anything like what happened on 9/11, or they only envisioned planes coming from across the ocean and never coming from within. You mentioned Samuel Bick. There were other instances where there are hijackings taking place within the United States, with the purpose of using those planes as weapons. And I don't remember them off the top of my head. I did an interview recently with Robbie Martin where we got into specifics. There was one instance where a FedEx employee was planning on crashing a plane into FedEx headquarters, I think. So the idea that they didn't prepare for that or didn't envision that, or it's absolutely absurd.
Yeah. Somebody flew a small plane under the White House trying to kill Clinton.
Right, exactly. Now, another significant document that came to light was titled Executive Branch Minders, Intimidation of Witnesses. And I think that was found by Kevin Fenton. Can you tell us about this one? Well, first, can you tell us what government minders are? Tell us about this document. Tell us about what government minders are, and how did they affect the 9/11 Commission?
Sure. As part of the Commission's work, it wanted to interview a lot of people, ostensibly to learn about how the government actually functioned, not just how it was supposed to function. And, if you're doing an investigation, you want to get to the bottom of things, you want to get candid responses from people. But the people they're talking to, a lot of the lower, they talk to a lot of people, from the low level to the high. All the lower level people who could tell the Commission what they saw at their jobs on the day of 9/11, or in the years leading up to 9/11, if it's intelligence-related work. Day of 9/11 is more the FAA military response. But yeah, a lot of these lower level people, like air traffic controllers, people in the military whose job it was to respond to domestic crises like these hijackings, and the terrorist threats, and the FBI's, CIA's investigations and what they're supposed to be investigating regarding terrorist threats. A lot of lower level people saw stuff, and so if you want to get candid responses, honest responses about what these people were witnesses to, probably going to want to interview them alone. You're definitely not going to want to interview them with anyone who might influence their responses or intimidate them in any way. However, all of these people, there was no interviews conducted where minders weren't present. And what minders were are these other representatives from the agency that witness, that employee works for, that were sent there by that employee's boss or people even higher up. And in practice, let me quote from Kevin Fenton's article about this, also posted at hcgroups.wordpress.com. And he quoted from this memo, which was written by Kevin Scheid, who's a senior staffer who led Team 2, and Lori Fenner, an Air Force intelligence officer, and lawyer Gordon Letterman. And this memo said that minders answered questions directed at witnesses. And minders, quote, acted as, quote, monitors reporting to their respective agencies on commission staff's lines of inquiry and witnesses' verbatim responses, end quote. And the staff thought this, quote, conveys to witnesses that their superiors will review their statements and may engage in retribution, end quote. And that the minders, quote, positioned themselves physically and have conducted themselves in a manner that we believe intimidates witnesses from giving full and candid responses to our questions, end quotes. So, given that these people acted this way in all of Team 2's interviews, it's not reasonable to believe that they got candid, honest, open responses to any serious lines of inquiry that they were trying to pursue. And given Vellico's role in the staff's work, he may have insisted that they were throwing softball questions anyway. But these 3 staff members complained about this, and it wasn't just this incident either. There was another memo that also complained about minders interfering with their work in some different incident involving their work with Canada on parts of the investigation. And so we don't know exactly what went on with the minders and other staffs, but if this is any indication, it was similar. And Miles Kara, who was mentioned previously in this call, teammate, lead staff member, said that the minders were actually a great help to them in the investigation because they did help them understand what was going on with the government processes and what was supposed to be happening. They were useful in getting information that was needed and helping witnesses to understand how to communicate information.
Okay, I have something to say now.
Okay.
With regards to Miles Kara has become somewhat of a 9/11 debunker, and he seems to me like an apologist for the 9/11 Commission. The idea of government minders intimidating witnesses, the idea of anybody intimidating witnesses, to me, the whole government minder issue completely discredits the 9/11 Commission in my mind. And,
Even
you know, what's
the appearance of it, regardless of whether they actually did influence anything, the fact that they were there taints the credibility of the Commission's work.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, you know, a lot of people in the 9/11 Truth Movement weren't even aware of the government minders until this document was found. But at the time of the 9/11 Commission, the 9/11 Family Steering Committee released several statements that addressed the minders. The families didn't want them there. And I'm going to go read to you some of their statements. This one is from September 10th, 2003. Quote, on August 27th, the Family Steering Committee received an update on the Commission's progress. We learned that there has been improved compliance from some government agencies and that minders continue to be present during interviews, even though the chairman and vice chairman publicly protested. Another one is from September 2003, quote, the FSC, or the Family Steering Committee, is shocked with the use of minders in the interrogatory process. And despite the Commissioner's similar objections to minders, as stated at the last press conference, minders continue to be present during witness examination and questioning. The FSC does not want minders present during any witness examination and questioning. It is a form of intimidation, and it does not yield the unfettered truth. And the last one I'm going to read from them is from October 4th, 2003. Quote, when asked about minders by reporters, Chairman Keene admitted that in order to have access to the witnesses, the Commission had to accept the minders. He said the Commission staff believes no one has been intimidated by their presence. Chairman Hamilton, however, added the caveat that it is very difficult to tell when a witness is being intimidated by a minder. To preclude any hint of intimidation, no minders should be present during the interviews. This should not be negotiable, end quote. So obviously, the 9/11 family members were furious that they were there. They did not want them there, and they were still there. Now, I have a quote from Colleen Raleigh, actually. It's a very short quote, and she says, quote, and there are minders in government that every time you're interviewed, I was never interviewed by myself, end quote. And that's Colleen Raleigh. So, as I said, to me, the issue of government minders just completely, it's one of the many, 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 many things that completely discredits the 9/11 Commission in my mind.
Exactly. And a couple points on that. Kane in early July 2003, he, quote, on a press briefing, I think the Commission feels unanimously that it's some intimidation to have somebody sitting behind you all the time who you either work for or who works for your agency. You might get less testimony than you would. And that's the chairman of the Commission saying that in July 2003. However, by September 23rd of that year, at another press briefing, he had changed his tune, basically saying, quote, talking to staff, what they have told me is that they've done these interviews, that the interviewees are encouragingly frank, that they, by and large, have not seemed to be intimidated in any way in their answers. I'm glad to hear that it's from the staff that they don't feel it's inhibiting the process of the interviews. And that was 9 days before the this Minders memo, executive branch intimidation of witnesses. It was the subject of the article.
Well, Keene has on a number of occasions changed his tune.
Yeah.
I can't remember any references off the top of my head, but I remember him saying one thing, as if he was for the families, as if he was, really trying to find out what happened. And then, a week later, he'll say something completely contrary to what he had already said, which indicates to me that he had a talking to, by someone. to change his tune.
Yeah.
But I have no proof of that. It just sounds like it. Now, the last question I'm going to ask you, another document that was found had Rich Blee's name listed because a careless redactor left it in. Could you tell us what happened as a result of this disclosure?
Sure. Rich Blee, very interesting character. Again, much thanks to Kevin Fenton. His sharp eye caught Blee's name in the staff memo that had been prepared. That I guess he was just reading through it and noticed that it was in there. And the statement was, let me find that. Oops, don't have it up. But anyway, Blee's name was mentioned in connection with George Tenet and Cofer Black. George Tenet was the director of the CIA, the director of national intelligence, and Cofer Black was what was his title again? Counterterrorism, something in the CIA.
CTC.
Anyway, it was something counterterrorism. But regardless, Richard Blee was worked under Cofer Black. He was reported to him. And also to Tenet. And Rich Blee specifically was the guy who replaced Michael Scheuer at the CIA's Bin Laden unit when Michael Scheuer was forced out essentially in 1999 or 98, and George Tenet released this memo which became a big deal where he declares war on Al-Qaeda, supposedly, even though Michael Scheuer, by all accounts, was rabid to destroy Osama bin Laden and his network of terrorists. And after Blee was put in charge, according to records that have come out, according to what's in the public records so far, this guy basically took no action to ensure that the FBI got critical information that it needed about terrorists that were trying to get into the U.S. Known terrorists, Khalid Almidar, involved in the 1998 embassy bombing. The CIA received information that this guy had a visa to travel to the U.S., and the CIA did not pass this along to the FBI, even though an FBI employee detailed to the CIA's Bin Laden unit wanted to pass it on to the FBI, and that same employee later wrote a cable saying the information had been passed on to the FBI. And I think I'm getting ahead of myself here. This is Chapter 6, footnote 44 material. But Blee is the guy in charge of that unit, and his deputy, Tom Wilshire, was one of the people involved in that incident and a lot of other incidents where the FBI's work is being instructed. People at the FBI who know from other bits of information that came out that there is a plot afoot to attack the United States, and they are rabid to destroy this plot. And there's people within the FBI and the CIA who are preventing them from doing the work. So
right.
Blee is the guy who is in charge of the Bin Laden. And in addition to that incident, there's a lot of other incidents where he should have known, where he was responsible, where he was clearly did or did not do something, which points to him. It's like to believe that this guy had any motive other than wanting the plot to go forward is just not credible. Because
well, one of the things that came from all of this is, Kevin Fenton wrote his book, Disconnecting the Dots,
right.
And Rich Blee was a main character in that book. But another thing that happened, the director of 9/11 Press for Truth, Ray Novoselsky, John Duffy, and Rory O'Connor started looking into footnote 44 and did further research into this whole thing. So, the fact that the careless redactor left Rich Blee's name in was very helpful. And I recommend that people listen to a podcast called Who is Rich Blee and look into everything that happened as a result of Ray Novoselsky and John Duffy's work. That's the last question I have. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, a bit more information on that. As you commented toward the beginning part of the interview about how John Judge said it's useful to go through government documents because you'll find stuff in there. That's another thing that Kevin found just by randomly going through stuff that might possibly have interesting information in it. And as a result of that coming out, Kevin posting his article, and the information now being public. The guys that you mentioned that did 9/11 Press for Truth, and then the podcast Who is Rich Blee, were able to get interviews with other people, and by sharing information such as Rich Blee's name, these people assume that they already know this, they know certain other information, and they talk candidly with them about what they already know and confirm things that might have been only semi-confirmed before. Now they're on the record, such as Richard Clark, who you mentioned, that interview. And then after that, George Tenet, Cofer Black, and Rich Blee all released a public statement on George Tenet's personal website responding to Clark's film and certain points that he'd made. And again, providing confirmation of their involvement. From Rich Blee himself, this confirmation came. And then in addition to that, because this attention is being created in the online independent community, it actually got a certain bit of mainstream attention with the Rich Blee's name, and also Alfreda Bikowski and Michael and Casey, two female CIA officers who were also involved in the failures to prevent 9/11, were mentioned. And who else was it? In the Washington Post, I think there was even on their website, a blogger had commented on Clark's public statement. And Clark, again, his point of view is the CIA knew these guys were in their country, but they were trying to turn them, or they were trying to do something else, and things got out of control, so they only told the FBI at the last minute. And by then it was too late, and that's why it happened. Which it's just not credible to accept that story for a number of reasons, and it's puzzling that Richard Clark is claiming he accepts it, but who knows? At least he's on the record saying what he has, and I guess that's about all.
Well, the point is that because of that disclosure, a multitude of things opened up for people. You know, for Kevin to write his book, for Ray to do his research. We got a lot of press because of the Richard Clark interview. It brought a lot of attention to the film 9/11 Press for Truth because Ray Novoselsky was the one doing the research and he was the director of the film. So it did a lot of good things. And I think that's the point of this, is that, you know, we need to see documentation. We cannot accept when the government tells us that something needs to be classified because of national security. In many cases, so it's very important to look at these documents and to do a lot of research. If you want, you know, because a lot of times it discredits what's being written in the actual report, and you know that's the whole point of this. Anyway, Eric, I want to thank you very much for coming on today. Is there any websites that you want to promote besides historycommons.org, which we both have been contributors to over the years?
I guess not, and I would definitely say support historycommons.org. It runs on a shoestring, very useful research tool. But also, you know what, the other side I mentioned, 911datasets.org, also run on a shoestring, doing good work. Scribd is making plenty of money, and we are not making any money from that. I think they put ads on the site. They charge for downloads. We do not make any money from Scribd, so don't give them any money. But I don't know. It's a good public service that the documents out there. But good interview, and glad to come on again. Thanks for dedicating it to John Judge. Great human being, great humanitarian.
Yes, he was. Yeah. All right, Eric, thank you very much for coming on today, and I'm sure I'll have you on again someday.
Okay, thanks, John. Take care.
All right, thanks, Eric.